This is TWiT.
I wanted to talk about this news story. This is a really interesting ruling this morning, or vote this morning by the FTC that basically says, you know, we've had a rule. It's I think more than a decade old now. The FTC has had a rule that says, should a company that handles sensitive health information, should they have a breach of said sensitive health information, they have to notify consumers, they have to notify the FTC, and in some cases, they also have to notify the press. And up to this point, the FTC, the rule itself isn't super clear on who was covered. And more so, even if the FTC would argue that, no, it was clear from the get-go, what wasn't kind of up to snuff was the FTC's enforcement of that rule, meaning that even because they argue that this rule called the health breach notification rule, that for as long as it's existed, it also included health apps. So apps that sort of traffic in your health data, that they were included. But since health apps that have had breaches in the past that maybe didn't follow the rule and make that information available as quickly as they're supposed to, since the FTC didn't come after them, then, you know, maybe you thought it wasn't. It was sort of in a gray area space. So today, in a vote of 3-2, the FTC basically clarified this rule and said, look, this includes health apps. You also have to notify U.S. consumers. You have to notify the FTC. And again, in some cases, the media. They can read the rule to learn more about it. Essentially, this whole rule was created because there are plenty of companies that deal with health data that are not part of HIPAA. They're not covered by HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So companies outside of your typical medical records and health insurance needed to have some rules tied to them to make sure that your data was being protected, and should it not be protected, that you could be notified about it. And so that's what this rule does. Now, what's interesting to me is that it is a pretty broad definition. So they clarify that apps that collect information directly from consumers and have the technical capacity to draw information through an API that enables syncing with a consumer's fitness tracker, that counts. So almost any app that I have on my phone that's able to pull information from a fitness tracker, in this case, my Apple Watch, they are covered underneath this rule. They need to follow this rule. An app that draws information from multiple sources is covered, even if the health information comes from only one source. So the example they gave is that even if you have a blood sugar monitoring app that draws health information only from one source, like the consumer typing in their blood sugar levels, if it also takes non-health information from another source, so for example, it can pull in information from the calendar that you sync with the phone, it's covered under the rule. So even if these apps sort of wanted to say, hey, you know, yes, we take health information, but we're only doing one thing, meaning that we're not, you know, working with an API, we're not pulling data from elsewhere. So technically this health breach notification rule doesn't apply to us. No, if you've got integrations in the app, if you are pulling information from your phone's calendar, from your customer's phone's calendar, if you are pulling information from, I don't know, the Notes app, from any other app, you are covered. And I like this too. They clarify that a breach is not just cybersecurity concerns. It's not just if someone comes along and breaks into the system and gets access to this information. It also includes sharing the information without an individual's authorization. So if these apps have been used in the past for marketing purposes to share information, they are at the mercy of this rule. And the FTC said, you know, we haven't really done a good job in the past of enforcing this rule, but now you're on notice. It is a violation, or any violation of the rule faces civil penalties of $43,792 per violation. And you may think $43,792 per violation, that's not very much money. It's not just per violation. It is per violation per day. So for every day that you are not notifying your customers about this and that you're violating this rule, you are potentially facing a fine or a civil penalty in this case of $43,792. And that just keeps racking up and racking up and racking up and racking up. So it could get pretty expensive. Interestingly, there are some companies who because again, the rule itself, it's one of those where it kind of already did include apps, but just some apps were kind of going, oh no, that doesn't really apply to us. And the FTC isn't saying anything. So we don't say anything. You're not saying anything, whatever. But some apps out there went ahead and sort of followed this rule, even if it wasn't being enforced in other cases. An example of that is, I can't remember, I think it was, I can't remember who bought it, but there was a pretty popular app that got purchased by a pretty popular fitness app that got purchased by a bigger company. And when that happened, when there was a breach, the bigger company followed the rule and notified as was needed. And so yes, MyFitnessPal, thank you, Adam W. In the chat. Under Armour, thank you, purchased MyFitnessPal. I love our chat. There was a breach and Under Armour notified as they were supposed to. And it kind of reminded me of the movie industry, because with the movie industry, all of those ratings systems are something that the movie industry created itself. And the reason that they created the ratings and this body that is an oversight body that helps determine what ratings movies get is because they did not want the government to regulate the movie industry. And so they said, no, you don't have to do it. We're going to go ahead and take care of it. We're going to do it ourselves. And so then the government kind of turned elsewhere to work on other regulations because they went ahead and took care of it themselves. So Under Armour did the right thing, kind of followed this rule that's already here and said, we're going to do this. But other companies have not kind of followed along with this rule. And so now that this is sort of clarified, this is good. One of the things I really liked in the piece was FTC Chair Lena Khan talking about the advertising and how this played a role. Given the growing prevalence of surveillance-based advertising, the commission should be scrutinizing what data is being collected in the first place and whether particular types of business models create incentives that necessarily place users at risk. Went on to say digital apps are routinely caught playing, quote, fast and loose with user data, leaving users' sensitive health information susceptible to hacks and breaches. Given the rising prevalence of these practices, it is critical that the FTC use its full set of tools to protect Americans. So this is a real crackdown to make sure that these apps that in the past have kind of gotten to go, ooh, we're soaking up all this data, but we don't necessarily have to be as protective of this data, or in some cases can use this as an opportunity to make money on this data. Now the FTC is coming in. Now, you may be asking, okay, but it was a 3-2 vote. Why was there any dissent on protecting users' data? Well, of course, there's a lot that goes into why that happens, but I do just want to read the Hill, which has information about that. It says the vote for the policy fell along party lines, with Khan and the other two Democratic commissioners voting 3-2 in favor of the policy against Republican commissioners Noah Phillips and Christine Wilson. So it seemed to be a Democratic versus Republican decision here. And one of the Republican commissioners explained that the reason they voted not to protect consumers' health information is because there is a sort of longer term, more wide encompassing set of rules and regulations that they're working on. And so they didn't want to do this sort of piecemeal stuff in the meantime because they needed to conclude those other things first. So, take that for what it is and what you do with that, what you will. But that's why it seems to have fallen along party lines. In any case, I'm glad this clarification has taken place, and that all these different apps that we maybe in some cases take for granted the information that they're collecting are going to have to be more proactive or face some serious fines. Now, the one thing that I think is important to point out is that there is an important definition here. This is only when there's a breach, be it a nefarious breach or a sharing of data, as the rule points out, only applies to unsecured, identifiable health information. Now, I don't know how we go into a definition of identifiable, what exactly that means, because for me, I would think that means that if they anonymize this health information, then they're okay with sharing it with ad marketplaces and all that kind of stuff. So that part gets a little bit murky, and it would be interesting to hear some more from lawyers in particular about that part of the regulation. So it's not a be all end all rule. It's not fixing everything, but I'm curious to hear you, Jason, if you feel the same way. When it comes to apps, I am happy to let the app, with health apps in particular, I'm happy to let the health app write data to my phone because of Apple's health app, which collects all of that information. Happy to let it write to that, but I'm not big on letting it read any of that information, meaning that it can access other things within my health app and sort of suck that up and send it to the cloud. And so oftentimes what I will do is only give it write permissions, not read permissions. And if it's read permissions, it is for very specific apps that are for example, health tracking. And I don't let it have access to some of the more, I don't mind if it has my calorie burn for the day and my steps for the day, but I'm not also going to give it access to heart monitoring information. So kind of the more private, more detailed, in-depth information. So I'm curious your side of things. And there's one other mention that I'll make that I completely forgot. Ember Mug is a great example of this. Love my Ember Mug. Fantastic. It keeps my coffee or whatever warm drink I have warm throughout all time. But on iOS, you can let it write and read health information so that you can track your caffeine intake. I am not interested in a smart mug company having my caffeine consumption. And so I have that feature turned off. But an app that uses my Apple Watch, a well-established app that uses my Apple Watch to provide me more insight on my heart rate and that kind of thing, I give that app permission to write and read very specific things. So it kind of depends on the app and whether I think that they are going to be using it for the purposes that I expect it to, or if they're going to be sort of making more money on that. How are you? Because first, I guess I'll ask Jason, does Google have like one app that collects a bunch of health information that you can go to? Like Apple Watch, this one app called Health, or not Apple Watch, but Apple in general on iOS has an app where there's one app where I can go in and not only log, but see all of the app's information that has logged my nutrient intake. So, if I use an app for meal tracking, it will tell me then how much calcium I've had in a day, how much fiber I've had in a day, how much this, how much fat, how much, et cetera, et cetera. That app also has information for my steps. It has information for my heart rate. It has information for my my doctor's records. All of that is in this one app. And then through the API, third-party apps can write to the health app and read from the health app. Is there something like that on Google? And then my second question for you is, how, quote unquote, fast and loose do you play with the health information on your device and with apps that sort of use that stuff?
Yeah. Google has Google Fit is their app that it kind of collects a lot of this information, and it's not, it's fine. It's, it's not as all encompassing as some other apps like Samsung's Health app, does actually track some things that Google Fit doesn't. And you can set them up so that they talk to each other. And there's plenty of third-party apps that act as like a conduit between that and, Fitbit information, although Fitbit's now in Google, but before it was, kind of setting it up so that some of these pieces of information could pass between them. And Yeah, I mean, so it is possible for these apps to kind of talk to each other. It's also something that Android has been doing in the last couple of years, where they've been getting a little bit more. They've been controlling a little more how easily data is shared from one app experience to another, and kind of siloing them, from a file access / data perspective. So you have to be, as a user, a little bit more intentional if you want to say, yes, this app can have access to this health information that's over here. So that's good. It puts the control, at least in the consumer's hands. Whether the consumer understands that control, that's a different story. I just don't really do a whole lot of fitness stuff with my phone to begin with, and I feel like we've talked about this to some degree, maybe a couple of weeks ago when I was showing off the Galaxy Watch 4 Classic that I've been wearing. It does a lot of activity tracking and everything, but I don't really do anything with that information. Like, it's nice that it does it, but I really am not the kind of person that's like really tracking all of this information. So it's not really top of mind to me. I don't really, if that information is in the app, that's fine. I should probably be a little bit more cognizant of what's happening to that information. But, a part of me kind of has a trust of Google. If I'm throwing this stuff into Google Fit, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't trust Google on that, but I just kind of tend to be like, it's going into Google Fit. I'm not really doing anything with it. It's just kind of par for the course. But I do think that having the ability to control that for people who really do care about this stuff is essential. And I think that Google does a pretty good job with that, to my understanding. I'm sure someone else might disagree with that, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody kind of falls along different lines when it comes to this thing, and right. Privacy considerations in general. But ultimately, I think if all this, and this is what this rule says, if all this rule says is that, hey, if you suffer a breach of someone's data, you have to let them know. Yeah, that's a really good rule.
Yeah, that's pretty good basic line of thought there for a business. Yeah. Hey, if something bad happened and it has to do with somebody else's data, and especially private data that can be really revealing, like health data, all data, of course, but that especially, then yeah, that's a pretty good foundation to kind of build upon. I'm definitely applaud the FTC for making that stance. I think that's good for consumers ultimately, and that's what it's all about. Yeah.